we're transitioning into a new unit, and basically what that means is we're just going to read a different work on love. We looked at some ancient philosophy on love, right? We looked at Plato's Symposium. We looked at 2 chapters of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, where he talks about friendship. Well, we're going to investigate now a really well-known work in more recent history. We're going to look at the philosophy of C.S. Lewis, and more specifically his book, The Four Loves. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about C.S. Lewis as a person, and then we'll get into the introduction and the second chapter of this book, which I asked you all to read for today. So, C.S. Lewis, what can we say about him? Really influential literary and philosophical figure within the 20th century. He was somebody who was well educated in the academy, somebody who performed his duties in war, somebody who was actually a converted Christian. If memory serves me correctly, his family was Christian, but he became atheistic as he grew up. And then he didn't convert back into Christianity until he was in his late 20s, I believe. And he characterizes his conversion as something that happened to him which was pretty involuntary. He talks about how he was kind of dragged into belief, kicking and screaming, and compares himself to the prodigal son. So he's not somebody who wanted to become a Christian, but he was somebody who, after looking at Christianity and after having some sort of religious experience, was converted to Christianity. To the Church of England, if my memory serves me correctly, which upset one of his dear friends, J.R.R. Tolkien, a little bit, who was a Catholic at the time. But they, still maintained their friendship throughout their years. So, Lewis, during his life, dabbled not only in philosophy, but also in writing literature, right? What are some of the famous books that he wrote? Can y'all remember?
Chronicles of Narnia.
Right, the Chronicles of Narnia. He wrote a space opera trilogy.
Oh, that I actually still not yet read.
Which is supposed to be good. I haven't read it either. His works tend to be allegorical with regards to Christian symbolism and philosophy. And so unsurprisingly, he presents kind of in this book a Christian philosophy of love, which is going to be different than the ancient philosophy that we've looked at so far. So there are a lot of things that go along with this kind of philosophy of love that he's... Am I spelling that right? I cannot spell today. If it's incorrect, just laugh at me in your heads. There are going to be a lot of things in which his philosophy differs from the ancient philosophy that we've looked at so far, which primarily has been based on this Greek Homeric tradition and Greek polytheistic religion. Lewis's philosophy is going to be informed by Christian monotheism, Enlightenment thought, and modern philosophy, which differs in startling ways from its ancient philosophical counterparts. He is going to agree with the ancient philosophers on some things, though. For example, his philosophy is going to be based on this idea that there really is what you might call an earthly realm and a heavenly realm. Base phenomena and transcendent phenomena. So his philosophy is going to be based on this distinction, on this split. This is something that we saw in Plato, right? throughout the dialogue, Plato's Symposium, we saw speakers invoking this idea that there are proper and improper forms of love, and that these correspond to either what is base and earthly and fleshy, or what is, higher and rational and ideal and transcendent. Right? This is something that Plato was big on. Somebody who, in his philosophy, explicitly makes a distinction between the realm of materiality and the realm of the forms. Like Plato, he's also going to argue that not all loves are equal, nor should they be given equal priority, effort, or imitation. So he's going to be arguing that, look, there are better and worse forms of love. There are different kinds of love that we should devote some amount of effort to, and this is not going to be equal to all forms. We should have in our lives a certain hierarchy of these different kinds of love. So to skip ahead a little bit, he's going to talk about there being 4 different kinds of love that we can engage in. But that not all of these loves should be treated or acted out equally. Okay, and there are certain rules, and there is a certain art to loving in these different ways. They're not the same. Okay? Really what this is all leading to is this idea that there is a form of love that we are called to embody, and that there is a model available to us that we can imitate. And that this form of love is more godly or transcendent or better than the other forms of love. Unsurprisingly, Lewis is going to argue that while there are different loves that we can engage in, there's one that is better than the rest, one that we ought to embody more, one that we should care about more, perhaps. This is the form of love that God engages in, and more specifically, the form of love that is embodied by the life and death of Jesus Christ. This is the aforementioned model, right, that I just wrote down. There's a form of love we are called to embody, and there is a model we can look to imitate that love. That is going to be Christ and or God the Father and God the Holy Spirit for Lewis. But let's talk about the different loves he thinks exist. He basically breaks down love into 4 different types. Okay? And he's going to be using some familiar words that we've already talked about in order to make sense of these different loves that we can engage in. What do you think these are going to be? Just spit them out.
Need loves?
That's going to be a part of it. Think more general. Think like, what was Plato talking about?
Oh, okay. So like romantic love, familial love, sexual love,
Right.
and
Friendly love.
Right, yeah. And he's going to invoke all of these ancient Greek words that we've already talked about. Right? First, there's affection. This is like the natural love that a parent has for its child, or that you have, for somebody that you're just fond about. Oh, Kelly, I just love Kelly. I'm affected by Kelly. I'm affectionate towards Kelly. We can basically define this kind of love as like some sort of natural empathy bond that you have with other people. Okay? The Greek word that is used to represent this kind of love is storge. Remember that word? Generally, the archetypal form of this kind of love is talked about in terms of the family. The love that a mother has for her son or something, right? When she's taking care of him as a little baby. So there's affection. And that's what he's going to be talking about in chapter 2 today. And there's friendship. Right? Friendship is a little bit different than the love a parent has for their offspring. You might say it's more equal, right? The friends are on more equal terms. There isn't generally some sort of power dynamic there. This is a friend bond, right? And what's the Greek word that's used for it?
Philia.
Right. I started writing it down and I was like, oops. Right. Philadelphia is what is how we invoke that nowadays. The city of brotherly love, right? So we can engage in friendship. That's a different kind of love than affection. We can talk about erotic love, right? And this was the topic of both de Sousa's book and Plato's Symposium. How would you define erotic love? What do you think? How does it differ from a friend bond or a natural empathy bond?
Intense desire.
Yeah, maybe an intense desire.
It's like sexual in nature.
It could be sexual in nature, yeah. Yeah, it's like romantic love,
Yeah.
right? That's like a good catch-all term. Obviously, the Greek word that this is based on is eros, right? Where we get the word erotic from. Then finally, the last form of love that he's going to talk about in this book, which he's going to call, I think, the highest form of love, the one that we should work on and really work on embodying, charity. This is the love that he thinks is written about often in the Bible, the kind of love that St. Paul urges the various churches and early Christians to embody. It's the kind of love that God has for us, the kind of love that is acted out in terms of Jesus' life and suffering and death, which saves us from eternal damnation. It is unconditional, selfless love, freely given, not based on any of our properties or whether we are good people. Unconditional, selfless love. And he likens this love to the Greek word agape. So these are the kinds of loves that he's going to be talking about in this book. Today we're going to look at affection primarily. And then next week, we're going to look at friendship and then start looking at erotic love. And finally, we'll round out by looking at charity. But there's one more distinction that needs to be made, which is something that you brought up, Sam.
Yeah.
Which is a distinction that he talks about in the introduction that he was going to base this whole book on, but he found that this distinction wasn't enough to completely analyze these different forms of love and what the rules are for following them, what they are like, how they work, etc. And that is the distinction between what he calls need love and gift love. It's obvious, he says, in human life that regardless of these categories that we just looked at, There is love that organisms have for things that are born out of necessity. And there is love that we have for things that is just freely given, and we don't have to give it. These correspond to need love and gift love, respectively. We all have experience with both of these kinds of love as well. And they show up in different aspects of our lives. The child loves its parents in part kind of because it has to, right? Like the nature of their relationship is such that without their parents, the child would die. This is the case of all of us, right, when we were children. There's a certain love that is formed out of bonds that are necessary for survival. This doesn't make need love worse or less admirable than gift love necessarily, but it's a distinction that Lewis thinks is important for the analysis that he's going to provide later in this book. Paradoxically, which we'll get to later, oftentimes when we look at gift love, we actually see kind of need love hiding in the background. But that's something that we'll get to later. Any questions so far?
No.
Great. Okay, well then let's jump into chapter 2. This is the chapter I asked you all to read for today. Rather, I guess it was Monday, but we didn't have class because I was sick. I'm doing okay. Thank you. I'm tired though. The name of this chapter is Likings and Loves for the Subhuman. And he's not talking about slaves here or different races. Okay, he's talking about things that are not human. We throw around words all the time like, oh, I love The Bachelor. I love, Chipotle. I just love T. Sweezy. Right? So there are things that we can love that are human and things that we can love that aren't human, like things, places, ideas, objects. He begins by talking about this kind of love. And I think he's got a lot of interesting things to say about it. As you'll note, Lewis writes very differently than Plato and Aristotle, right? He has a lot of little gems here and there about the nature of love, a lot of things that I've underlined and I'm going to be reading to you throughout these classes to show some of the interesting insights that he's providing to this domain. He begins by distinguishing between two different kinds of pleasure. There are need pleasures, pleasures that we can feel as the result of satisfying some desire, right? Like if you're really parched, oh, that first sip of water is really pleasurable, right? Or if you just worked out and your muscles are screaming at you and your body's telling you to rest, oh, sitting on the couch, fulfilling that desire feels so good, right? So there are need pleasures like that, pleasures that we can feel as a result of fulfilling some desire. But then there are pleasures that we can feel just by noticing or attending to something. The former, these need pleasures, are kind of transitory, right? We experience the pleasure when we fulfill the desire, and then once we fulfill the desire, we don't really get pleasure from the thing anymore, right? Oh, that sip of water after you've trekked through the desert for 2 days is awesome because you need it. But then once you're hydrated, right, the next sip of water doesn't feel pleasurable, right? So they're transitory. They kind of go away. The pleasure, in a weird way, is the result of kind of snuffing out a desire that you have, right? Putting it to rest so it's not screaming at you. And it's based on need. So we can feel these kinds of pleasures when we fulfill those desires that we have because we're trying to survive or keep up the maintenance of our own body and mind, right? Necessary for survival. But then there are appreciative pleasures. This is pleasure that we can just receive by noticing or attending to or interacting with something that is kind of inherently good in and of itself and adds value to our lives, but it doesn't fulfill a desire that, we need to satisfy in order to go on living. Okay? We can characterize these kinds of pleasures as pleasures that are just kind of inherently good. Like when you walk into the bakery and you didn't have a desire to smell something nice, but you smell, those eclairs and you're just like, oh, it smells so good, right? Or when you walk into Chipotle and you're like, oh, I love the smell of that steak or whatever it is, right? Or when somebody mows their lawn, and you walk outside and you're like, oh, I love that fresh lawn smell, right? Or the smell of gasoline. Some people just like that, right? These kinds of pleasures are more permanent, and they're kind of based more on objectivity, right? Need pleasures are pleasures that you experience as the result of satisfying some subjective desire. Appreciative pleasures are pleasures that you just experience because you recognize the thing has like a positive quality in and of itself. And it's showing itself to you, right? It's like, boom, here I am. And you recognize, oh, that is good or beautiful or nice or something, right? Here's what he has to say about the differences between these kinds of pleasures. He talks about this on page 33. If I can flip to it. And he relates this to the Christian philosophy he's trying to express here. Need love cries to God from our poverty. Gift love longs to serve or even to suffer for God. Appreciative love says, we give thanks to thee for thy great glory. Need love says of a woman, I cannot live without her. Gift love longs to give her happiness, comfort, protection, if possible, wealth. Appreciative love gazes and holds its breath and is silent. Rejoices that such a wonder should exist even if not for him, will not be wholly dejected by losing her, would rather have it so than never to have seen her at all. So you see the distinction between these loves, right? Need love is born out of satisfying some desire. Appreciative pleasures just come about by seeing something that is good or beautiful or glorious in and of itself, right? You just recognize it. You just attend to it. So this is one of the distinctions that he's going to use to further his discussion of these different kinds of loves. He's going to call back on them. So, it's clear that we can love things, right? We can love things based on need. We can love things just based on appreciation. We can love ideas. We can love places. We can love objects. We have some sort of love and experience some sort of pleasure from things that are not human. What Lewis is trying to convince us of, at least partly, in this piece, in this chapter, is that although love of things can bring us a lot of pleasure, love of things does not ultimately fulfill us. And it's easy for our loves of things to become twisted and to become demonic, as he calls it. He brings up various examples of how love of things can become twisted and harm human life and harm our person. One of the big things that he brings up is love of nature. Right? You have all these American poets, especially in the transcendental movement in the 20th century, talking about love of nature, how great nature is, how nature is a glorious mistress that unfolds before our eyes. Some people go so far as to treat nature itself kind of like a god, right? Bowing before it, praising it above all else. Thus, love of nature and the appreciative love and pleasure that comes from that has had a profound impact on humans, both good and bad. Love of nature has allowed humans to do some great things. It's inspired them to write amazing poems, to transform their lives, to engage in environmental activism, we might say. But it's easy for love of things, especially for love of nature, to become twisted and to harm us and our relationships. He talks about this on pages 36 and 37 in the book. The only imperative that nature utters is look, listen, attend. The fact that this imperative is so often misinterpreted and sets people making theologies and pantheologies and anti-theologies, all of which can be debunked, does not really touch the central experience itself. What nature lovers, whether they are Wordsworthians or people with dark gods in their blood, get from nature is an iconography, a language of images. I do not mean simply visual images. It is the moods or spirits themselves, the powerful expositions of terror, gloom, jocundity, cruelty, lust, innocence, purity, that are the images. In them, each man can clothe his own belief. We must learn our theology or philosophy elsewhere. Not surprisingly, we often learn them from theologians and philosophers. So he's saying that nature, although it can present us with these wondrous images and moods and spirits, nature can't tell us what's right and what's wrong. Nature can't tell us how to orient our lives. If we just look at nature for that, how might we live? Maybe we'll become Darwinians and start thinking that the strong triumphing over the weak is how things ought to be, right? Well, that doesn't sound good, but that's how nature works, right? The lion doesn't feel bad about murdering the gazelle. So he's saying love of nature alone is not going to fulfill us or point us to how we're supposed to live our lives. When I speak of clothing our belief in such images, I do not mean anything like using nature for similes or metaphors in the manner of the poets. Indeed, I might have said filling or incarnating rather than clothing. Many people, I am one myself, would never, but for what nature does to us, have had any content to put into words we must use in confessing our faith. Nature never taught me that there exists a God of glory and of infinite majesty. I had to learn that in other ways. But nature gave the word glory a meaning for me. I still do not know where else I could have found one. I do not see how the fear of God could have ever meant to me anything but the lowest prudential efforts to be safe. If I had never seen certain ominous ravines and unapproachable crags. And if nature had never awakened certain longings in me, huge areas of what I can now mean by the love of God would never, so far as I can see, have existed. Of course, the fact that a Christian can so use nature is not even the beginning of a proof that Christianity is true. Those suffering from dark gods can equally use her, I suppose, for their creed. That is precisely the point. Nature does not teach. A true philosophy may sometimes validate an experience of nature. An experience of nature cannot validate a philosophy. Nature will not verify any theological or metaphysical presupposition, or not in the manner we are now considering. She will help to show what it means only. So, people talk up nature. People have this great fondness and love for nature, but we can't get our morality or our theology or our metaphysics from it. Okay? Nature does not reveal to us all of the secrets of the universe. Okay? How we're supposed to live our lives, what things, ought to mean to us, how we should treat Jerry down the road. Nature is a wondrous thing, but it can't teach us. It can give us examples of maybe what some things might mean to us, but it's not a teacher. Okay? So he is arguing. So what does that imply? Well, we shouldn't look to nature for the answers to all of our questions. Nature perhaps is something to be enjoyed. Maybe it's not something entirely to emulate. So people have love of this thing called nature, but it's not going to orient their lives, okay? Or it's not something that we should look to completely orient our lives. Because there are things that, nature reveals to us that, it doesn't give us the answers. We're still left in the dark about a lot of different things. What's another thing that people have love for, especially in the U.S.? When you talk to somebody who's traditional or conservative. What? Besides money, yeah, people have love for money, that's true. Family, perhaps. Think bigger. The country, right? People have love for their country. They're patriotic, right? Well, great things have come out of people having a certain love for their country. Right? Look at what love for country can do. It can motivate positive social policy. It can get people on board to do these crazy, awesome, weird things. Love of country, like nature, can also inspire people to great action and great feeling. Okay? What's the problem with love of country? If there is any. Maybe you don't think there's any.
The KKK are nationalists. Christian religious nationalists.
So, love of country can also inspire some terrible things, right? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, look at what love of country can do. It can motivate us to commit atrocities, to murder, to meddle in other countries' businesses, right? Maybe to promote bad social policy.
The Israel war right now is a prime example.
Sure. Love of country, love of home, land, culture, and history. All of this stuff can fill people with wonder and happiness. But patriotism can turn ugly, right? He writes about how love of country and all of what that implies, all of its manifestations, how that can result in some nasty, ugly stuff. Okay? He talks about this on pages 44 and 45. What does seem to me poisonous? What breeds a type of patriotism that is pernicious if it lasts, but not likely to last long in an educated adult, is the perfectly serious indoctrination of the young in knowably false or biased history. The heroic legend, drably disguised as textbook fact. With this creeps in the tacit assumption that other nations have not equally their own heroes. Perhaps even the belief, surely it is very bad biology, that we can literally inherit a tradition. And these almost inevitably lead on to a third thing that is sometimes called patriotism. This third thing is not a sentiment, but a belief. A firm, even prosaic belief that our nation, in sober fact, has long been and still is markedly superior to all others. I once ventured to say to an old clergyman who was voicing this sort of patriotism, "But sir, aren't we told that every people thinks its own men the bravest and its own women the fairest in the world?" He replied with total gravity, he could not have been graver if he had been saying the creed at the altar. "Yes, but in England it's true." To be sure, this conviction had not made my friend, God rest his soul, a villain, only an extremely lovable old ass. It can, however, produce asses that kick and bite. On the lunatic fringe, it may shade off into that popular racialism which Christianity and science equally forbid. So patriotism can turn ugly, right? It can lead to this belief that our own culture is superior to all others, our own way of life is inherently better than everybody else's, that our own history is the only one in which anybody on the world stage is a moral exemplar. This is what love of country can motivate. And so what is Lewis trying to reveal to us? Well, basically he's trying to point us to this idea that, like Plato argued, the objects of our love matter. Okay? And I think the kind of argument that Lewis is making throughout the book is not only do the objects of our love matter, but how we carry out that love, and categorically, what certain types of love are going to do for us. As we'll see, he's going to argue they're not all created equal. Okay? The fact that love of things can become so easily twisted into all these ugly and nasty manifestations shows us, Lewis thinks, that love of things, love of this earthly stuff, whether it's a table or a laptop or a country or an idea or a place, all too often our love of these things causes us to treat them as idols. We worship at these things, and that messes up our relationships, and that messes up our lives, and it produces a lot of harm, a lot of suffering, and a lot of chaos. So there's something categorically wrong about privileging love of things above all else. We shouldn't do that. That's not the way to a happy, successful, healthy, fulfilled life. Privileging love of things, okay? Humans have and follow many loves of earthly things, but all too often we make them into idols, which causes problems for us. This general sentiment is found on pages 48 and 49. He says, at the end of this chapter, starting at the top, I may without self-righteousness or hypocrisy think it is just to defend my house by force against a burglar. But if I start pretending that I blacked his eye purely on moral grounds, wholly indifferent to the fact that the house in question was mine, I become insufferable. The pretense that when England's cause is just, we are on England's side, as some neutral Don Quixote might be, for that reason alone is equally spurious, and nonsense draws evil after it. If our country's cause is the cause of God, wars must become wars of annihilation. A false transcendence is given to things which are very much of this world. The glory of the old sentiment was that while it could steel men to the utmost endeavor, it still knew itself to be a sentiment. Wars could be heroic without pretending to be holy wars. The hero's death was not confused with the martyr's. And, delightfully, the same sentiment which could be so serious in a rear-guard action could also in peacetime take itself as lightly as all happy loves often do. It could laugh at itself. Our older patriotic songs cannot be sung without a twinkle in the eye. Later ones sound more like hymns. Give me the British Grenadiers with a tow, row, row, row any day rather than land of hope and glory. It will be noticed that the sort of love I have been describing and all its ingredients can be for something other than a country, for a school, a regiment, a great family, or a class. All the same criticisms, however, will still apply. It can also be felt for bodies that claim more than a natural affection, for a church, or, alas, a party in a church, or for a religious order. This terrible subject would require a book to itself. Here, it will be enough to say that the heavenly society is also an earthly society. Our merely natural patriotism towards the latter can very easily borrow the transcendent claims of the former and use them to justify the most abominable actions. If ever the book which I am not going to write is written, it must be the full confession by Christendom of Christendom's specific contribution to the sum of human cruelty and treachery. Large areas of the world will not hear us till we have publicly disowned much of our past. Why should they? We have shouted the name of Christ and enacted the service of Moloch. Thus, he's trying to argue here that all too often we end up classifying our love of things as having some sort of transcendental meaning or authority which they don't have. And he talks about this in the context of war, right? All too often throughout human history, wars fought for some sort of transcendental ideal have been used to justify torture, mass slaughter, genocide, and death, right? And he thinks this is bad, and it's stupid, okay? It doesn't make a lot of good sense, and it's not good for humans to treat earthly things like, consumable objects or country or a building as something that has transcendent value. Because it doesn't, okay? It's not God. It's not a higher spiritual entity or whatever. It's just a thing, okay? So if we treat these things like they're transcendent entities, if we allow our love of these things to become too prioritized in our lives, that's going to be shitty for us and for everybody else involved. So love of things has its place, but it should not be the thing that we care most about. We shouldn't orient our lives towards things like that. Okay. What do y'all think? He's basically saying love of things can be good, but it's easy for them to become twisted. Agree? Disagree?
I agree, absolutely.
How do you see that happening in our day and age?
I think really everywhere. I think that people, especially in, I guess I can only look at it from the perspective of the United States, but like consumerism, like social capitalism, but like capitalism, you know what I mean? Like we tie objects to our identity, and we tie
Right.
Physical things to like our sense of self, and that's like inherently unhealthy because like at the end of the day, like the clothes that you wear or the decorations that you have in your house or just like little things like that we like attach a lot of personal value and emotion and love to, don't actually serve us on like a spiritual or like true level.
Okay.
And that energy could be better placed into things that like could serve us on like a true and spiritual level.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think the more spiritually evolved you are, the less you care about things.
Okay, say more about that. Yeah.
I don't know, like I watched this video this other day, like this guy was like, you've made it in life, like when you can go to the Ritz-Carlton in Paris or like go to the Hilton Inn, like in some bumfuck town, and like both have like peace and like meaning there, because it's all about like internal, and like everything external, I think, is almost a reflection of like how you are on the inside. How you see things is how you're almost doing on the inside.
Okay, so maybe you could say people's love of things reveals something about their character.
Yeah.
And the sentiment I'm getting from y'all is that we shouldn't prioritize love of things. Should we prioritize it more or less than romantic relationships?
Yes.
Less.
Do people do that in real life?
I also think that something that's like a fault in our just general society, right, is that it's much easier to not have a spiritual attachment to items or to luxury or to having nice things when those nice things are more accessible to you. And like the truth is that, we don't really live in a society wherein those nice things are accessible to everyone. So someone who, has gone to the Ritz-Carlton, you know what I mean, doesn't have to be amazed by it or find any peace in that because they don't have to worry about never being there again, Whereas someone who doesn't have the opportunity to have a lot of physical things can be almost like you would think that people who have a lot of money are greedier. And while that is like a true stereotype, I think on the opposite end of that, people who have nothing can also be quite greedy and can also put a lot of their emotional and investment and love and attachment into physical objects because they don't have as many,
Yeah,
and they don't have accessibility. And like this like is gonna like go a little bit into politics, but like it's the same thing where it's like poverty's linked to crime, you know? Like people freak out about scarcity because like a lack of something is like more prevalent to them than like it's not even so much of having something or like loving a thing, whereas it's like the fear that you will never have that thing or you cannot get that thing again. And so I think that like, at least from my perspective, like it's easy for me to be like I don't really care about what I wear, or like I don't really care about, you know, like the food that I eat, or like if I'm going somewhere like nice or fancy, or if I have this and that, because I know that like at the end of the day, like my basic needs are fulfilled and met, so I don't need to like worry about things. But if I were in a position where I would need to worry about things, then I think that like they would have a higher value to me than maybe other people sometimes. You know, and I think that's where like a lot of selfishness comes in.
Yeah, I think it can go both ways, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's what's kind of tricky about talking in general ideas about this, because like you said, there are cases in which not having something can make people want that thing more, or especially if you put a prohibition on yourself against having or doing something, right? You're like, okay, I'm not going to go on my phone for 3 hours today. The first thing, because you put that limit on yourself, is like, I want to fucking go on my phone, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. So poverty, lack can make people want things. But also, it's true that some people have this idea that not having much material goods at all is preferable, because having more provides unique temptations, right? Like take the case of Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. This was a guy who had all the power in the world at the time. He could have had anything he wanted. All of the drugs, the babes, the music, the pillows. Yet instead, he tried to follow some sort of Stoic ideal that he built up for himself regarding self-control and rationality. And he was able to withstand those temptations, though a lot of people aren't, right? Take like the Wolf of Wall Street or something as an example, right? Just drugs and sex and alcohol throughout that whole movie, right? Yeah. So what does that depend on? Whether or not you're obsessed with material things. If it can vary whether or not you have stuff, what does it depend on?
I think it's the scarcity that just creates all the value, and that's like why poor people are so, or just want to have things so badly, and like a rich person doesn't even care about a Lamborghini or a yacht or anything like that, because they have it all and it doesn't mean much of anything. And I think most of life comes down to like a balancing act of like kind of scarcity, or you can even think of it as simple as like light and dark, like the good or the bad.
Sure. I think, and this was a point that Plato was making through Socrates' voice in the Symposium. What Lewis is going to say here is, I think what he's implying is something like, whether or not your love of things consumes you, in Christian terminology, has everything to do with your heart posture. What do you value and what are you oriented at? Right? Because the people that you'll find who are in poverty, who don't care about material things, well, that's not what is valuable to them. Right? That's not what their life is oriented around. Their life is oriented around family and those little joys, right? And positive human relationship. Not buying the next Mega Man remaster or whatever it is, right? So, I think what Lewis is going to say is, in our hierarchy of loves, perhaps love of things should be on the bottom.
And that love of God's going to be at the top, huh?
It's going to be, yeah. It's going to be more general than that, though. It's going to be something like, I think, embodying the love that God has for us, which is unconditional and graceful.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see if y'all think that that's a good form of love to prioritize over all others. Maybe you'll think friendship matters more. Certainly, if you read the poets and the artists, romantic love matters most of all, right?
Mhm.
Fuck just being nice to people. I want to be enraptured, you know? What else do you have to say about this? What was popping out to you when you were reading this chapter? Did you underline anything or make any notes about anything?
I can't lie. I read it on Sunday and I didn't look at it a second time, so
That's fine.
I really.
It's not so easy to follow Lewis's train of thought because he's not presenting what we might call a systematic philosophy of love. He goes off on all these different tangents and, gives these little observations of a bunch of different things.
I think, like, going back to the whole nature thing,
Yeah.
I would definitely disagree with him. Like, you can't learn things from it. So I think
Okay.
there's a lot of order and harmony in nature that anyone can see. Like, if you just watch, like, a nature documentary, or if you even out there, And there's also, like, I don't know, to me, like, I was previously a Christian too, and now I'm kind of believe that there's higher things than that. Maybe there is like an infinite creator but not necessarily like the God that Christians would talk about, I guess.
Okay.
But I think nature would definitely point to a designer. It would point to like harmony and order, I guess. And you can kind of learn that from it.
I think, yeah, okay, that's interesting. I think you might disagree with Lewis less than you think. I think he might say something like, seeing things in nature can help provide meaning to you. But, like, if you watch one of those nature documentaries, is that teaching us guys to behave like male birds and shake our butts and build, like, nice nests for women? Is that what we're supposed to do?
No.
Is nature teaching us that, if I got to go out there and kill somebody to eat, I should do that? Is that the lesson we're supposed to draw? Lewis would say no, like, nature is showing us that there's all this stuff that's happening. But in order to get lessons from nature, we almost need to have been presented already with some sort of morality or worldview to draw meaning from it. What do you think?
I was just about to ask that because he seems to be like saying you can't obtain answers from nature, but I don't know,
like nature can validate your worldview, but
right.
that's
okay. So that's what he's saying. Okay.
I think
that that makes sense because I don't dislike C.S. Lewis' train of thoughts. That said, I isn't like every like Christian aren't all of those ideas just up and little proofs that you see in the world of proofs of God? Aren't those just interactions you have with nature as well? And therein your justification, oh yes, I know God is real, is simply because of an interaction that you had and gained from nature, just like you're denying in here that you can't find meaning to life from nature. Well, isn't your meaning to life being found from nature as well?
Okay. So your objection is based on a disagreement in metaphysics.
Sure.
Right? Metaphysics is the study of reality. What exists? What is all this stuff? You might believe in the following metaphysical view. Naturalism. Everything that exists is a part of nature. No supernatural things, ghosts, demons, spirits exist. So we're a part of nature just like an atom is a part of nature. We're just a more complex arrangement of natural stuff. Everything comes from nature. Everything is nature. Lewis does not share in this metaphysical view. Unsurprisingly, he's going to be a supernaturalist, which tends to be the view that nature exists and things that are not natural also exist. that are not products of nature, evolution, atomic forces. If you believe in ghosts, if you believe in demons, spirits, things that are not explicable through science, through the naturalistic worldview, you're a supernaturalist. If you believe demons or angels or souls or spirits or ghosts exist, then you fall into this camp. Lewis would say, like he says in one of the writings here, natural stuff does not teach us that God exists. It can validate for us that God exists because it looks designed, perhaps. But he wouldn't say that the interactions like that you have with a squirrel, like this natural thing, is going to provide for you metaphysical truths. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So he would deny the idea that all of this is natural. Why? Because in part we are non-natural. Because we have souls or consciousness or whatever it is, and that's not like a natural thing. It's like something extra that God gave us or something on his worldview, you know? If you will have taken the introduction to philosophy with me, this kind of lines up with dualism, the view that there are material things that exist and non-material things. Like some people think the mind is like a non-material thing. It's not made of atoms and energy and mass. It's something else. It's different in essence from this thing. But, you know, that's a little bit different than naturalism. So, yeah, he would just say, not everything in the universe is natural. What else do y'all think about this chapter?
I think I'm excited to read like the following chapters where it gets more, I guess, in depth into his I guess hierarchy of love. Because I don't know, I feel like I like reading about people who I guess have different perspectives on things, and so far I agree with them. So it's little, but I feel like
It's kind of fun.
Yeah, once we get more into I feel like the religious-y aspects, I think I'll be interested in reading that, because that's not something that I necessarily would venture out to read on my own.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're going to look at a wide range of views in this class. One Christian, one very egoistic, that says self-love is the only thing that matters. A lot of different perspectives that are religious and non-religious, ancient and modern. So it'll be cool to investigate that. All of this, I think, Lewis is trying to build up to this argument in which he says the objects of our love matter, how we act out love in our life matters. There is something like an ideal form of love that we should attempt to act out. That might be something that you might want to think about. Do you think there is an ideal form of love? Whether it's in the domain of eroticism, or in the domain of friendship, or in the domain of affection, whatever it is. Can we objectively say that some love is better than others, more proper than others? Lewis, I think, is going to say yes. In fact, we think and act like this all the time when we say, that's not love, or you shouldn't treat her like that, right? So it'll be interesting to see what y'all think about that.
I think I'll probably agree with C.S. Lewis if he's going to give Jesus as the ideal model. Because I've studied Christianity for at least a year, and although I think maybe in some cases you could say some of the things Jesus does could be a little extreme or ultra selfless, I think in a lot of ways you're never gonna have like a bad life if you follow what he does. I feel like
Okay.
you'd appreciate pretty much everything.
Yeah, I guess we'll see if you end up kind of agreeing with that. Maybe I'll just ask one more question. I'll let you all go early. I believe Lewis, at the end of our investigation, is going to say something like, unconditional, selfless grace is like the best. And that's the kind of love that we should strive for. I had a friend who thought that was stupid. Love should always be conditional. What do you think about that?
Should always be conditional?
Yeah, love should always be based on the object of your love. And it should be based on whether or not they're a good person, or they're nice to you, or if they lie to you or not.
So like even if your parents are awful, and you should still love them because.
That's kind of what Lewis would say.
Right.
I think I kind of agree with your friend in a sense. I do think that love should always be conditional, but I do think that you should try your best to minimize those conditions. I think that once it sort of reaches a territory where your unconditional love harms or otherwise I don't know, say inconveniences. If it harms you, or if it begins harming maybe other things that you love or other people that you love, people are complex and difficult to deal with, and I know that you should treat other people how you would like to be treated, but I don't know, if I was being an asshole, then maybe I would not want someone to treat me with unconditional love. If maybe someone knew that I had a problem, or I was not being problematic in the 2023 sense, but being problematic in the sense of doing things that are actively causing harm to others, actively inconveniencing others, taking advantage of others. I wouldn't want that person to keep supplying me with whatever it is, whether that be attention or forgiveness or a physical thing.
Think about it in terms of you loving another person. Do you think that your love should be based on their characteristics and actions?
Towards the world generally. Yeah.
So if somebody is not treating you well, it's justifiable not to love them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if they're not treating other people well, even if they do treat me well, I know there are a lot of people who are oh well, I know they're a piece of shit, but they're nice to me, so they're still my friend. I feel like that's a lot of people's arguments, just first thing that comes to mind, sexual assault. Let's say you have a friend of a friend, third party, who's yeah, this guy sexually assaulted me, and he's in all your classes, and every day you sit next to him and you laugh with him and you say hi to him, but you're oh, I'm very anti-sexual assault. I think that goes against your core values and principles, and
Okay.
you should not extend unconditional love to that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe we can disentangle love in part from how we treat people. So what I'm thinking is something like this. Maybe we should work on having empathy for Hitler, but that doesn't mean that we let Hitler do anything that he wants to do. Or is that a ridiculous take?
I was thinking with that, I think C.S. Lewis might say in response is you should, if you really love your friend, stop them from doing that and say something. And if someone loves you for that same reason, you're doing bad things, that friend should step forward, unconditionally love you all the same, but still tell you you're doing something wrong, still want to help you, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Is that maybe that was what he would say?
Yeah, I think, so he's going to base this ideal form of love on the love that he thinks God has for us. And the Christian worldview has a pretty pessimistic view of humanity, right? It's going to say that we are broken, and humanity caused the world to be broken, and things suck, and people suck. But God still loved us enough to try to save us. And maybe that's what we should be doing too. Even if we recognize that people suck, we should try to do our best to help them become better and help them not hurt others. But
I would say if you're not trying to do like the unconditional love, like you're almost hurting them even more. I mean, like.
Okay, interesting.
I guess what like Sam was saying, like you don't want to like encourage their horrible behavior, but I think.
Right.
In
Yeah.
Like in my eyes, like unconditional love allows you to still love the person without hurting yourself. As like you were saying, like you gotta like speak up and like try and help them and be like a real friend will like tell you when you're wrong, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think to a certain extent, if you have true unconditional love, then like that's not just for your friends. It's just
Correct.
for people.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think that I owe that to every single person who's ever done something wrong.
Mhm.
You know?
You can't do that. It's not
Yeah.
possible.
So that's another thing. This is something that you should meditate on. It may be true that we don't owe that to people. But is it still an ideal worth reaching towards? Maybe. I don't know, but maybe you don't think it is. You know, maybe you don't think that kind of attitude towards others is desirable. That's something you're going to have to think about, you know? Okay. Y'all want to go early?
I mean, I guess.
Okay. All right.
You do.
Well, Reed, I just don't have much else to talk about. We got through my stuff quicker than I thought I would. Read the chapter 3, the complete chapter on friendship, okay? Because we're going to go over the complete chapter on Monday, and then we'll go through the next chapter on Wednesday.
Cool. Unless you get sick again.
Right. I'll try not to.